So I'm going to be short and sweet and introduce Gregg Castro. He is a professional and Indigenous peoples advocate. Gregg.
Okay, how many are in Stan's class right now and think they're going to get a good grade out of that? Some extra credit? Okay, yeah, okay. Yeah, I figured. I knew something was going on there. All right. Well, those of you who have been in Stan's class know that I wing it a lot. That's the professional term. It's an Indian term too, I think. And so I didn't have a lot of plan, and part of it is because I wanted to hear what Dahr was going to say and kind of let that guide me. What I didn't intend to do was sing a song. And now after hearing Dahr, I need to sing a song. So we're going to start off with that. Hopefully you can hear it. I'm going to put the mic down here. This is from my father's people, the Salinan people, the south from here. I'll go into that briefly in a moment after the song. But we do the song first. The Salinan people are south of Leone down towards San Luis Obispo, actually just this side of it, Morro Bay. And this is what we call the Coming from the Earth song. Hey yo, 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 start yo, kale, hey yo, start yo, hey yo, hey yo, scan, hey yo, spec, hey yo, 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 mechke nato wet, hey yo, next step nato wet, hey yo, mechke nata te tamelot, next step nata te tamelot, hey yo, 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 hey yo. Thank you, Kanyon. What's a little bit different is that I never had to follow a talk like Dahr just gave. I'm usually following some elder, or he makes me go in front of him, and then I get to relax, chill out and back, and listen to the elder say the really important things. This is a little bit different. And as I said, I didn't really plan a lot because I wanted to hear what Dahr was going to say, and in the way he said it. One of the things that came to me as I was listening to him, Evan Peters, who's an Indigenous environmental activist up in the Arctic area, he spoke to the pioneers several years ago, and he said two things. One, he told a story where he visited with the great culture bearer Oren Lyons back east, and his wife and him took him to their sacred lake to do a ceremony and pray to welcome him. And Oren Lyons' wife, as they were approaching the lake, said, "Careful, don't touch the water." He says, "Why?" He says, "Because it's the most polluted lake in North America." And so they did their song, and then he approached the water, and he bent over and looked into it, he said. And he saw that it wasn't moving very much, and there was a film, as sometimes happens with polluted water places, and in the stillness of the water in that film, it was like a mirror-like surface, and it reflected things, and he was looking into himself. He realized he was looking at his own reflection. And what came to him right away is that this water's polluted, but until we clear the pollution in ourselves, we're not going to get anywhere. So that's where it starts. And Dahr alluded to that a little bit in some of the things the elders said, that it's about taking responsibility yourself. That is the Indigenous way. We don't talk about rights. In fact, I asked our culture bearer, who has a grasp of our language, is there any translation for the word rights? And he was thinking like right turn at first. And then the right way came at the end of our discussion. He goes, well, actually, no, I got nothing. Our language that I know of does not have that precise of a translation. And that's my understanding of a lot of the Indigenous languages. They talk about sacred obligation. They talk about commitment. They talk about duty. They talk about that aspect of it. And that's because we came into this world and it was a gift. And you're grateful and humble for those gifts because you didn't necessarily earn them. Somebody gave them to you. And at least at one point, before we heard about Dahr's talk, it was a pretty good place to get a gift of. The earth was pretty good up until relatively lately in terms of human history. And our elders still with us in our native communities here in California that can remember a time when I was first coming up. In fact, it was the weekend I met Dr. Babe, Dr. Darrell Wilson, in the early 90s. He was brought up to interview this lady named Elizabeth Case. She was a Karuk woman, born in the early part of the century. And she said, I did not see a white person until I was nearly 20. And I did not speak language until I went to work in town in my 20s when the men all left to go to war. So she lived all her life on the Karuk homescape on the Klamath River. And she remembered a time when there was a radio when she got to about 20. But before that, it was just the same life that her ancestors had lived for generations. The house one maybe is a little bit better, and there was more of the people then. They had recovered from the genocide that had happened in the 19th century to a certain extent. And life was good and something that the ancestors from thousands of years ago could at least recognize in a world that they could still recognize. But even at that time, she talked about they could see something was different. And for a long time, our scientists were dismissed by the European scientists as anecdotal evidence. It's mythology, it's storytelling. And it's even now that they're barely understanding the truth of what our elders were saying. Half a century ago, along the Klamath River, they were sounding the alarm about the water temperature. And they didn't have to have any fancy electronic instrument stuck in the water to figure it out. They could take their finger, right? Pretty accurate instrument, actually. You can, the human finger can take, if you pay attention, can detect very minute changes in environment, whether it's temperature, pressure, whatever. But we're taught not to trust that because it's feely kind of stuff. So it's not validated. So to get back to Evan Peters, he talked about the pollution within ourselves first. And we have a fancy name for it now, decolonization in the Native community. But it's the same process of getting back to what my friend Dr. Melissa Nelson named her book, The Original Instructions. Now, one of the things our elders talk about is that there isn't the truth, there's a truth. And it's usually relational, meaning it's my truth, your truth. Now that sounds a little weird in modern times and in face of modern science. But that's because our culture makes it personal. The environment is personal. We're impacted because we're in it. As a matter of fact, our stories tell us we come from that environment, so we're part of it. My dad's people talk about being made from the very earth we came from elderberry. That's what this clapper stick is made of. And we're made from this. That means we're inextricably a part of that place. And when you've been in a place for a very, very long time, and when Native people talk about history, we're not talking about a couple of decades. We're not talking about 250 or 530, whatever it is nowadays for that guy who got lost in the ocean. We're talking, well, our stories say the dawn of time. Time immemorial. When the world was created the way we see it now. And archaeologists are now talking, when I first started with them, it was in the 8,000 range, and if you said something crazy like 10,000, they'd think you're nuts. You're one of those radical Indians, aren't you? And now, just a couple of months ago, I think they announced what they do in their process of confirming these things in scientific analysis of about 16,600 years in a village site south of Seattle. So one of my elders, I know what he would say. He would say, well, they're getting closer. And when you have that kind of relationship, not just across time, but of place, because our ancestors, particularly the ones here in California, being intimately tied to a place, they stayed there and they lived their lives. And rather than wander around, although there were some of those, because we had vast trading networks, but the majority of people were in a certain place, and rather than the breadth of area, it was the depth of area, meaning the attachment and understanding of where they were. So maybe some of you had this experience in the last couple of weeks. Last week, I think, you lose the lights in your house, right? We're not going to get too deep into that, but so you wake up and the lights are out, right? So does that mean you pull the covers over your head and, just like freeze until the sun comes up? Well, some people did actually. But if you have to go potty, you have to get a drink of water, or your kid's crying, you're going to get up in the dark, and maybe you forgot to check the batteries in your flashlight. But you've been in that house for a very long time. So you can get from your bedroom to their bedroom or to the kitchen or the bathroom or wherever you need to go just from your memory, right? And that's only from being there a few years, maybe a few decades. So imagine being in a place for 15, 20,000 years or more, and you're going to know every nook and cranny. You're going to know every rock, every boulder, every tree. You're going to see the changes. You're going to see them die and new things come up on them. And having that intimate connection to a place can allow you to see these things change over time, and then when they change and don't change back, because we understand the normal cycle of life, but when they don't change back, then our ancestors and our elders were starting to talk about it. And they've been saying this for many decades, and nobody was listening. Until just a little time ago, where we had people like Dahr, like my friend Dr. Kat Anderson, like other people actually doing something outrageous. They went to go talk to the Native people and ask them questions. And they actually listened. And they said, well, here's how these people did it. And it worked for them. Beyond the mythology of Europeans coming and saving us after 16,000 years, we needed saving apparently, even though they're the ones who were starving. So how now do we approach this with Native people? Because it's not the same scientist. We have our scientist, and they speak in our technical terms. And how do we bridge that gap? I don't have the answer. That's the question. I think that's the question our next generation might have to answer, and they are, because the next generation is vastly different. We're already seeing that within the Native community, within the ally community, and others, that they are not questioning the way we did. And we're going to come back to that in a minute. Another thing that Evan Peters said, very personal to me, he said, nobody who does this kind of work can go through it without going through the equivalent of a nervous breakdown. And the term nervous breakdown I thought was a real gentle kind of term for what a lot of Native people have to do, especially if they grew up like I did, away from our homeland. Our parents being forced out of the homeland into over the hill, Silicon Valley, to survive, to live, find work, because it wasn't sustainable in our homeland. Even in California, we were gentrified very early, before the word even was used, out of our homelands and into the urban areas to become part of the machine. And so I've had to go through that equivalent of a nervous breakdown. Again, the fancy term nowadays, decolonization, to shed those misperceptions. And for those of you who've been in Stan's class, I usually sing the fog song. And I really use it for me too. I actually do. I don't just show off for you guys. I really use it for me because I'm constantly having to shed a skin like a snake sometimes to push those things away, because they can overwhelm you. That data can overwhelm you. It's a huge amount of data. It's absolutely incontrovertible. It is proven. There's no doubt whatsoever amongst anybody who knows what they're really talking about. That's the difference. As opposed to those who are just in denial and don't want to admit that they don't know what they're talking about, or just don't want to admit that the data is telling them something. And of course, we heard also the part about climate scientists. If you talk to them directly, they're saying something much different than the reports coming out. And I was just sharing with Dahr, I know a number of climate scientists. Half of them are unemployed and unemployable, because the system is not allowing the process to work. My good friend, she got a degree, and her dissertation was on climate change just down the street at UC Santa Cruz. And she's teaching elementary school over the hill and doing financial planning on the side, because she can't get a job in her chosen field, because the field is closed and getting closed down every day more. The more the need, the more the repression of that need. So why is there the denial? I mean, I'm not going to talk about the data. To me, it's not worth talking about anymore. It's a given. Why aren't we acting? I don't know the answer to that exactly, but I know some of the experience. And I think I can compare it to what the Native people, especially in California, have gone through the last 250 years. In a couple weeks, there will be the commemoration for the Patola expedition, which was the first European excursion to California for the purposes of colonization. There had been visitors before, but that's the first time they walked in the door without the intention of going back out. And there began the demise of our civilization. So it's not a celebration for us, but we're going to talk about it. I'm on a number of panels, so is Kanyon, along with Alcatraz and all the other reactions to that colonization. And I've had to deal with a community that has had to deal with that reality of more than 90% of the people in California that were here before 1769 were not here by in 1880. In a little over 110 years, 90 to 95% of my ancestors were gone. And since then, we've been dealing with that reality that we don't want to face, we don't want to handle, we don't want to talk about until recently. And a lot of our elders did not talk about it. They did not talk about the trauma they're going through, that they still experience. They were taught it was even dangerous to talk about it. So there are all kinds of reasons for denial. And that's what I see in this. It's much more than deer in headlights. Because I think people really do know the truth. They often do. If you think about, if you're honest with yourself and think about it on a personal level, right? You come up with a conundrum, some personal issue you have to resolve. And if you think back now, you really did know the answer most of the time. Maybe not every time, but most of the time you did know that. You just didn't want to do it. For maybe good reasons. Maybe the consequences were just not worth it to you. Or you didn't want to endure the pain. Or the consequences that other people would have to endure because of your decision. And that's what it looks like to me now. It's a reflection of what I see in our communities as we struggle to recover, to deal with first contact, because after being here for 16, 18, 20,000 years, 250 years ago was like last week, so we're still in first contact. Didn't happen decades ago or centuries ago. It's still happening now. It's still a process we're working through as we deal with these other crises that are still affecting our communities. And of course, climate change, especially in the rural areas, in the reservations, in the communities still living in their homeland, are dealing with every single day. Because not all those communities have a Safeway they can run down to or a Target store. Many communities are still living a substantially amount of their lives and their resources from that environment, and it's going away. And they see it right in front of their eyes. I was up at a climate change conference held at Klamath by the Yurok tribe about 5 years ago. And Thursday and Friday we talked about climate change, and on Thursday the government agency was there, BOEM, new agency that deals with environmental impacts. And on Friday we had a tribal community discussion. And on Saturday they took us up the river, the Klamath River. And they took us to the place that had the first major fish kill. And you read about it in the papers and you even see the pictures. And that's far different than being there and seeing the landscape. And having one of the tribal people tell you of the literally thousands of fish that were floating there one day. And that was their food that was going to waste and creating a hazard because it was not being disposed of naturally. It overwhelmed the environmental system. One thing that Daryl taught me and other elders, it's not about equality, it's about balance, and Dahr used that word. And balance may mean something culturally different for us, but it's about coming to a place where we have a shared responsibility. And everybody's doing their part. We don't know what the outcome's going to be. And our elders tell us, you can't attach yourself to that because you don't know everything. You don't know all the elements that are coming in to affect what you do. You only can control you. You can only make an impact on the decisions you make. And of course, you want to wave your magic wand and just, poof, climate change is gone. Thank you. Yeah, I'm hearing that too. So that's not how it's going to work. And we're taught in a culture about achievement, setting goals and hitting them. That's the only way you get validated. And not just being a good person on its own. And our elders tell us, beyond the consequences of what you do are beyond your control, but what you decide to do is well within your control. And that's part of balance as well. And I talked a minute ago about we're bonded to this earth. Our people believe we're physically bonded to this earth. But we have to understand the nature of that relationship. And to put it bluntly, we need the earth, but the earth doesn't need us. And it might be sad if it doesn't hear our songs like I just sang. But we already know what it's done at least 5 times. It started fresh. And it can do it again. And if we continue on our path, we're going to help it do it again. So what do we do in the face of that mind-numbing data that leads you to an even more mind and soul-numbing conclusion? Sometimes we look too far out. You always have to look up a little bit, make sure you don't fall into the pit or off the edge of the cliff. But sometimes if you stare off into the distance too far, you're going to miss all the rocks that you're definitely going to trip over. And maybe the few snakes on the side. You also have to keep your head down and pay attention to what's right in front of you. My family always gets on the case because I'm always telling them, like, don't put that in the trash, put that in the recycle bin. That's my little thing. That's not all I do, but that's something I can decide in the moment. And it's not inconsequential to me. I can't do anything about that data. Can't do much about methane bubbles. I can't do much right from where I'm sitting and standing about those skinny polar bears that are evaporating in front of our eyes. But I can do this, and hopefully it has the impact that you will then take it further. It's not a command, it's a suggestion. As Dahr pointed out in his encounter with the elder, they don't tell us what to do. They say, here's the information. And if you've grown up in a culture that talks about obligations, commitments, then you've been immersed in a morality and ethical system that will guide you to the answer you need to have. And you'll know that answer because you'll find balance within yourself. And I'll sort of end with something that Daryl shared with me that's pretty stark and blunt. Many years ago, we were actually doing a storytelling event that he organized at the shores of Lake Tahoe. Now imagine sitting around Lake Tahoe telling stories with a bunch of Indians. I mean, this is awesome, right? And I spent all day sitting next to Daryl. And at one point, we were talking about the environment. We were talking about the cloudiness that was coming into Lake Tahoe. Its legendary clarity was not quite there every day. And he had been working with the Washoe people for a couple of years before that, who are the people from the east side of the lake. And he asked, what I thought was going to happen. I go, well, I'm really not sure. And he goes, none of us are sure. That's actually the right answer. But he said, you have to get real with the truth. And the truth is that from the ancestors that taught us, the system is morally, ethically, spiritually bankrupt, but not the people. The system you operate under, you don't have the obligation you think to that system. You can decide to step away from it and do the right thing. And that's what the elders actually tell us to do. Do the right thing in that moment. That's what you can affect. That's the quote-unquote control you think you have. And in the next moment, that's another opportunity. You just keep stepping like that into the future. That's all we can do. But if enough of us do it, we will have an effect. And that's all we can ask for now. We can't change the past. We can't even go back 3 seconds. But we can affect 1 second in the future. And that's about as much as we can handle at the moment, it seems. But that can be enough. Thank you. Oh. Yeah, we have time for some questions. I can't imagine why you'd want to ask me anything, but... Okay, I'm out of here. Oh, there we are. Yes. I'll let Kanyon answer some of that, but I think we get this question a lot, and it's a hard question because some of us don't have organizations or efforts that are outward facing. But I always say one thing, and it goes back to what I just finished talking about what you can do within yourself. And for the vast majority of people I know, the history they know is not the real history. It's not the truth. You may have gathered some facts along the way. When did that guy Chris get lost? How many know that? Right? You know the year, right? Because it's been burned into your brain. And what does that really mean, though? That's data. What truth is in there? What followed that? That this guy discovered America. I guess if you call the Caribbean islands America, well, he didn't even discover those. There was 250,000 Taino people there. So to me, it goes back to what Evan Peter said, and that's part of it. I mean, there's lots I have to learn. Not just about history in general and all the other things. Even indigenous history. I know some things about my own history because it's been taken from me, and I've had to go get it back. And I'm still piecing it together. Our people are still piecing it together. And I know a lot about other California communities. We had our own unique history. And I know something about the other indigenous people on this continent. And I have a lot more to learn. But from what I know, that most people have been told a fairy tale. So the first thing I would say is people is before you start out working with Native people, learn about those Native people, learn about Native people in general, and learn about what really happened to them. Not to generate sympathy, but because there's an imbalance in the world created by an untruth that is perpetuated and spread like a virus. So that needs to be worked on. That would be the one thing I tell you above everything else. Any other questions?
There's 7.5 billion people on this planet right now. When Native people lived in pre-colonization, there really weren't that many people living on the North American continent. So, is there any? You talk about imbalance. How do you reconcile this plague of humans that have infected the planet with somehow moving beyond that? I just don't know where you
The indigenous people grew to the size that they needed, not the planet, and not what the planet could sustain. Obviously, it could sustain a lot more. But we didn't want to do that because it's not our right to do that. We took only what we needed for the purposes of living a good life as people and as persons, as community, and no more. So we grew very slowly. That was not lack of civilization. That was the epitome of civilization. And what we're seeing now is what you call civilization, our ancestors call a swarm of locusts. Well, it tells me that the earth could tolerate a lot more people acting badly than we thought, but it's near the end of its patience. And again, we already know from your scientists, geologists, that what the earth can do and has already done a number of times. The earth will survive. A lot of people, living things in it, may not. Anything else? Yes. Hi. I'm not necessarily recommending this for you, but I know Daryl Wilson was very proud to be arrested on 4 continents. He told me this a number of times with a grin on his face. And I think, again, it's because he grew up in a culture that looked at what needed to be done and not necessarily the consequence of what had been done. So when you're bonded to a community, right, you're not thinking so much of yourself, so you're not focusing on, well, geez, I'm going to go to jail, whatever. You're going to focus like, what's this going to mean for my community if I do this? So one of the things that I recommend, and I'm starting to see that with younger people in various ways and activism, is they're forming communities. You can't go solo. And by forming a community, I'm not talking about joining an organization. It's much more than that. You build bonds and relationships with those people. I help agencies consult with Native people on a process, because they're alien to us and we're alien to them. So one thing I tell them is it's not a business for us. This is our heart. This is our soul. This is our spirit when you come and consult with us about our culture. To you, it's just business. It's a checkoff box. It's data. It's information. For us, it's family. It's life. And I think if you do that in whatever you do, when you form a group, you make it more than just a bunch of random people together. Because that amplifies what you do. And you tend to get the support of those people so you're not so worried about consequence. Because that's really the only way if a change is going to happen, I think, is that we put ourselves out there at least a little bit and have a community to support us when there is a reaction that's not so pleasant. But you know it's worth it. If for no other reason is that the people you've bonded with are telling you that. Okay. I think we're done. I am.